Ephesians Prysock is the most important player in Steve Belichick's scheme.
You are Locked On Huskies, your daily podcast on the Washington Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back in to another edition of the Locked On Huskies podcast. I'm Roman Tomashoff. That's Lars Hanson. He's site editor with Athlon Sports' Inside the Huskies. I'm the site editor with Huskies Wire. Thank you for making this your first watch or first listen today, as we are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKDOWNCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Now, Lars, we got a really fun show coming at the Everydayers today. We're going to talk about all the different offensive line combinations that we saw during Wednesday's practice. We also, you got them all written down over there. We both got our handy little notebooks here. We're also going to get into the most important players on both sides of the ball to Washington's scheme. Now, that's going to sound a little bit different for both the offense and the defense because, Lars, right off the bat here, Carson Bruner might be the best player on Washington's team this season, but I do not believe that he is a top 3 player in terms of the importance to the scheme. And number one to me, for a variety of reasons, and I know it is for you as well, is Ephesians Prysock.
Yeah, and again, I know it sounds, we got to preface this because I know it sounds crazy to say that the guy at the heart of the defense is not the most important. I know that off the bat, I'll give it to you. It sounds kind of crazy, but when you think about all of the things that Ephesians Prysock does to impact the defense as a whole, taking away a half of the field, drawing the best matchups, and what I'm curious about is as we go through the season, does he end up following guys, following the 1A receiver, or does he straight up just do the Richard Sherman and I'm just going to take away this side of the field, just no matter who you put over here, you're going to have to figure everything else out, because then the reason why he's so important is that allows Carson Bruner, who does wear the earpiece, the green dot, as we're against the play call for Steve Belichick, he's then able to set up everything knowing, okay, Effie's got that whole side of the field taken care of. Now, again, to be fair, you got Broussard or Cam Fab or whoever you want to pick over the top to help out, but most of the time he is going to be safe more than not in one-on-one coverage. Now, again, this is the perfect opportunity for someone to cut this from 4 months from now if he draws the best. But I truly think that he is up to the task, because we saw it in Arizona where, to be fair, you're playing opposite Tacario Davis. You may or may not always be drawing the 1A matchup, but we've seen it both in spring camp and in fall. And I remember asking Denzel, I believe on Tuesday, I'm pretty sure. What is it like? Because it really seems like everybody in that room, whether it's Giles, Denzel, Jeremiah, even Audric, some of the guys, when they get a chance to go up against him, everybody seems like, it's like, who do you want to play in one-on-one pick up basketball? Oh, I want him. Like every time I need the toughest test. And that's why he's so important, is because if you can, no matter who you're drawing, if you can take away half the field, that is an incredible help for Carson Bruner and the rest of this defense to say, okay, we just got to do our assignment knowing how good that side is, and we can scheme up things, maybe even to bring on double pressure. And there's so many things you can do with it when you have one half of the field taken care of.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the biggest thing when it comes to Prysock, is his length and his size and his ability to play man coverage, which is something that I know we've stressed on the show before is very, very important to this Belichick scheme, where you can have a guy that can do all that and free everybody else up. That is what can really get the cogs turning, where, there are so many different examples that you can point to over the 20 years of success that scheme had with the New England Patriots, whether it be Ty Law, whether it be the Darrelle Revis years, whether you look at Christian Gonzalez before he got hurt. There are so many other examples that you can turn to when this defense was at its best and say, yeah, it's because they had a number one corner who can really lock it down. Stephon Gilmore is another example that comes to mind. And he was so productive in the scheme that he won Defensive Player of the Year, where those guys exist. And those guys are very, very important to what it all comes down to. And all of this, as you said, Lars, is about making life easier for Carson Bruner to an extent where, if all these guys do their jobs and Carson ends up leading the Big Ten in tackles, I don't think either of us are going to be surprised, where that's the kind of upside that he has in this scheme. And with that being said, number 2 is Cameron Broussard, where we saw him return to practice on Tuesday and he practiced again on Wednesday after suffering a dislocated finger on Friday. He's still wearing a club on that right hand, but it's nice to see that he's out there, he's healthy. And this is another guy where his versatility is so important. We've seen him line up everywhere in the secondary, from the nickel corner to safety to linebacker to on the defensive line. He's everywhere. He's doing everything. And it's really nice to see where, this was the guy that when he committed, you and I said, if he starts, we're not going to be surprised. And it seems like he's really forcing his way into that conversation with that versatility and with his ability to do so many different things. And he's a guy where, we've talked about some of the different packages we've seen where there are a bunch of safeties on the field where he's one of them. And he's usually lined up across from Carson as an inside linebacker, where this is something where, okay, yeah, instead of asking Carson to go play man coverage, he can now, spy on a quarterback if it's a running guy, or he's somebody who can, he feels a little bit more freedom in run support. Because when we talked to Carson, that's one of the things he said was, I feel more confident and more freedom and to just, go do what I excel at instead of worrying about what I might be doing wrong. So it's all about just these different things that can really make him feel comfortable and confident. And Cameron Broussard is a guy who's going to help him do that in a variety of ways.
Yeah, I mean, you hit every single nail. I think the only thing that I can really add is the summation that I can respond with is he had staying power at Sacramento State, and it's why he's going to have staying power at Washington, at least for 2024, because I believe he's only got 1 year left. Correct me if I'm wrong. Maybe he's got two.
Yeah.
But either way, whether it's one or two, again, this is what we're talking about, where these are all good promises you can have down the line. But it's why you go and get a guy who's got veteran experience. Even though when we're talking at the FCS level, I think we're going to start, 2024 is really going to be a year, because we've seen a number of guys go from the FCS level to major college football Power 4 programs. Joey Slackman, was considered a one-time Washington target under the old staff back in December, which was just a crazy time and all things considered. But, there's and Sebastian Valdez is in that same exact mold coming from Montana State, another very important figure. But the reason why Prysock was so important and also Cameron Broussard is so because you're taking away the back end, which makes life so much easier for the front four, for Durfee, for Valdez, who already have great pass rush ability and great, first steps and all that to be able to impact the quarterback and stuff the run game. But when you start from the back to the front, that's kind of how we always saw the great Washington defenses, which again, to Steve Belichick's credit, when he calls it the Washington defense, that is actually a hallmark of the Washington defense. Protect the back end, build to the front, and then still have elite players at every single position. So you're not just saying, okay, we got 5, first-round cornerbacks and a walk-on front 7. Because, for a couple of years, a few years ago, that seemed like what it was. It wasn't actually the case, to be fair to those players, but just from a coaching perspective. And so that's why we can see the scheme that Steve Belichick has allows so many different things to happen. And Cameron Broussard is one of those guys where, as you said, when they went to get him out of the transfer portal, even though you already had Justin Harrington, we were seeing Harrington look great in the past couple of practices, making some PBUs, making plays, but they're two different types of players. They're just flat out two different types of players. And it seems to me Cameron Broussard can play with anybody at the second safety spot. It seems like whether it's Cameron Broussard or Cam Fibikilanen, Mikel Esteen, Justin Harrington, whoever you want to put back there, Peyton Waters. But having that veteran presence, I think, is what's making all this come together, because when we talked about initially that depth at safety, it was all freshman, redshirt freshman. It's like, okay, at some point we need somebody who we can talk to him, give him the play, give him the call, and then go out and execute it without that much explaining.
Right. No, absolutely. And that's why we got to move on to one more guy here real quickly. And that's defensive tackle Sebastian Valdez, where this is a guy who we've seen him make a lot of impact as a pass rusher throughout fall camp so far. And he's been really impressive. I really like what we've seen from him. And he's just one of those guys where we've seen him move all over the defensive line, get pressure in the pass game, really be impactful as a run defender as well. And it's something where when you have a guy who, there's been a healthy rotation up there so far, where I don't know if he's going to end up being a true 3-down player up there. It's very hard to, find those guys and ask them to play 45, 50 snaps a game. But if he ends up being one of those guys, he can be really, really effective in a variety of ways. And it's a guy where, when he requires a double team, that makes it easier for Carson. Or when he's getting one-on-one coverage, he's going to be able to get to the quarterback at a consistent rate from what we've seen from him so far. And all these things just make life easier on everybody around him. And it really brings the scheme together, which is really exciting to think about. And Lars, with that being said, let's get over to the offensive side here. And let's start with Landon Hatchet. right after a message from our good friends over at Game Time with killer last minute deals, all in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee. Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets, which is great news for all baseball fans out there like me, where I'm trying to hit up a couple more Mariners games before the season is over. And I know that I'm going to be using the Game Time app because Game Time has so many great things like last minute deals. You can save up to 6% off buying last minute for sports, concerts, comedy, theater, and so much more. They've got zone deals. You can save even more when you choose a section and let Game Time choose the seats. And they got their all-in pricing where if you toggle this feature, if you turn it on, you get to see your total upfront with no surprise fees at checkout. And with the Game Time ticket coverage, your purchase is covered with the most flexible customer service policy in the ticketing industry. You can take the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKDOWNCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices, guaranteed. So, Lars, let's start with Landon Hatchet when we get to the offensive side, where this guy really, really ties everything together in terms of not just what the offensive line wants to do, but the offensive line is going to determine so much of the scheme as a whole. And that's going to start with somebody who can call the shots at center. We also saw him taking some snaps at guard today just to figure out his versatilities, figure out what else might be working for this offensive line. But we're going to get to that later. But when I look at Landon Hatchet, I see somebody who is very, very important to this scheme because he really did impress. If you can impress Ryan Grubb as a true freshman, I feel that you're going to have staying power in really any offense. And with him in the middle, he really does add so much to this UW offensive line.
Absolutely. And I think, then when you saw Landon come in last year, he looked like a sophomore or junior just based on his size.
Yeah.
In terms of physically, he looked ready, similar in a way to what I know how you feel about Justin Hilkema in that regard, where he just looks like, okay, you know what, if he ends up having to see the field because of either injury or what have you, and that's exactly in a way how Landon ended up getting that spot. Now, I think we are both of the opinion that he would have got some playing time last season, regardless of Mateo Mele's injury, but that certainly opened the door for, okay, boom, boom, Parker moves over, Landon moves over, whatever you want to call it. And it's in a way almost like the reverse of that. Now with Landon coming back, you have so many options that you can kind of move with. And that's what makes him so important, because you first of all need a absolutely true, solid center, because that's where the offensive line starts. I know we've had this discussion before where the left tackle, or in last season's case, the right tackle, because of, you have a left-handed quarterback, you need to protect the blind side. But the center quarterback communication, there's only one person touches the ball every play, two people that touch the ball every play on offense, no matter what. Center, quarterback. All right, now, as I say that, it's really just a center, because you could have the center do a wildcat option and the quarterback's not even the play. So I kind of was like, as I'm saying that, I'm like, I get that, but the overall point being, they've gotten that relationship down. I know you mentioned it on a Tuesday show or Monday show that Will Rogers, the first-team quarterback, acknowledged that he and Landon have been getting work. And I think we haven't really seen that many snaps. But it's a matter of how does Landon build the rapport with the rest of the guys, get the line communicated, and then also can you do that, carry that over between a game and practice, which is why Landon getting time last season was so important.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the more that I watch what Landon has done just throughout, his very limited time this fall, it just feels like the offensive line is more cohesive when he's out there. And I don't mean that to knock D'Angelo Titialii or knock Zach Henning or Parker Cross or anybody else who's taken snaps at center. It's just Landon has such a good feel for this offense. And it's one of those things where, I feel when we look at high school recruiting, you don't see a lot of guys that are recruited as a natural center, where that's what Landon was. He's got such a good feel for the position, and that's one of the reasons that Ryan Grubb trusts him so much. Where, sitting behind Parker Brailsford, that's okay. Nobody's going to fault him for that. That guy's one of the best centers in the country, and it's going to continue to be one of those guys this season. But when you look at Landon, it's okay. Yeah, he already knows the position. He's got a good feel for it, and he can tie these guys around him together. Whether it be, a fifth-year senior on either side of him in Gard Memolar and Enoch Vamahai, or, a redshirt freshman in Soani Fasolo, or a sophomore in Drew Azzapardi. No matter who it is, he's doing a really good job of bringing it all together. And with that being said, let's talk about one of the guys he's blocking for next, and that's Jonah Coleman, where we know Jedd wants to run the ball. We know he wants to do it effectively, and we know Jonah can do that effectively because we saw him do it at Arizona. And it's going to open up so much if for Will Rogers, for Denzel Boston, who we're going to get to, for this entire receiving core, like we talked about on yesterday's show, if Cam Davis, if all the running backs really can be effective, can average 4 or 5 yards a carry. But it all starts with Jonah Coleman.
Exactly. And we've seen it a number of times, both back in the spring, but especially in the fall camp, where Jonah's been that release valve in a different type of, because I think really, you can use that term to a few guys, Giles Jackson, but this is in a different mold, because when you go back to the Saturday scrimmage and think about the fact that they didn't take a lot of deep shots, well, the Big Ten, you're going to have some great secondary plays. So sometimes you might not be able to drive the ball deep. You need to be able to scheme guys open. And Jonah Coleman has become that perfect guy underneath, along with Giles Giles being in a different role. But that's what makes Jonah Coleman so important, because as a running back, Jonah can it allows you to both hand it off to him, or he can kind of roll out. He's natural at both, and I think that's what's important for Washington. Kind of in that Dylan Johnson, I know he's not the exact same back, little bit different size and stuff like that, but they both are really adequate pass catchers. And I remember actually talking to Jonah Media Day, Big Ten Media Day, way before they came back and did their local media, and he said the one thing that pissed him off about his EA College Football 25 rating was his running back. They had him fumbling a lot in the games. He's like, I've never fumbled. I don't fumble.
Yeah.
That's BS. And I think it kind of spoke to his character, but it also just spoke to, just put the ball in the hands. And that's why Will Rogers is the perfect quarterback for him, because Will knows more than anybody coming from that Mike Leach offense. Oh, you had a running back catch 50, 60 passes? Oh, your coach was Mike Leach. Oh, that checks out.
Yeah. And that's something that Jonah can do really well, where that's exciting. And, we look at this offense, and there are a lot of running backs that catch the ball in the backfield, whether it be Cam Davis, it would be Sam Adams, Daniel Ngata, Adam Muhammad, Jordan Washington. They can all do it. But Jonah is the most proven in that sense. And Jonah just has the most experience under his belt when we think about that. But we want to get to one more guy here, and that's Denzel Boston, where, Denzel, even though, shout out Kevin Cummings, to quote him from the other day, there are no number one receivers in this offense. Denzel looks like he's going to be let's just call it the priority target then. You don't want to use the term number one receiver, where he looks like he's going to be that priority target for a whole bunch of different reasons. We saw him be a fantastic player throughout the spring. We've seen him really come along this fall as well, where he's using his physicality more and he's developing into a true top receiver. And that's something where, Will Rogers is going to look to him early. He's going to look to him often. And even though you have a guy like Jeremiah Hunter, you got a guy like Giles Jackson, if Denzel can prove early on in the season that he can be that true top target, then it's going to make things a lot easier for Jeremiah. It's going to make things a lot easier for Giles Jackson, where all of a sudden defenses are going to shift their coverages more towards that side of the field. And it's going to just make life easier and see a lot more single coverage with both those guys.
Exactly. Like, I'm not calling Kevin Cummings a liar here, but how many times has Will Rogers, much like Michael Penix last season with Roma Dunze, gone pre-snap already knowing where the ball is going, and it's ending up towards Denzel Boston one way, shape, or form? To be fair, Giles, and again, to Kevin Cummings' credit, Giles has also been a popular target. Jeremiah is also, but everything starts with the release, the ultimate release out of the deep. And I think the reason why Denzel is so important is because you truly can line him up anywhere, ask him to do anything, whether it's, and the reason also is because the run blocking element of him, which is why he saw the field as much as he did his first couple of seasons at Washington. Right. That element come November, and this is no disrespect to Giles or Jeremiah. I think actually Giles might be a sneaky blocker just because of the height. He might have, we're a little more confident breed, when it comes to that sort of thing. But late November, Denzel going down for a block, it's one of those, like, he seems like that kind of guy. Just no matter what, you ask Kevin Cummings, who's in your receiver room right now? I think the first guy that you mentioned would be Denzel Boston, and that's no slight to Jeremiah or Giles or any of the young freshmen where it's like, hey, could he be the best receiver? No doubt, but down the line. But when you talk about kind of just everything that Denzel does, and I think I told you this off the show, the way that he spoke at his media availability, you can just tell this is a guy where he's learned from Roman Dunze, learned from Jalen Pope, learned from Jalen McMillan, and to be Jamarcus Shepard, and now getting great coaching again in Kevin Cummings. It's like he's primed to do exactly what those guys did, and he believes like, hey, look, we're going to break some records this year. And I'm like, well, to be fair, like last year was a record-breaking year, so let's kind of quantify this and calibrate this a little bit. But I think it's still fair that no question Denzel is the linchpin that keeps everything together.
He really is, and that's what makes him so important, and that's what's going to help him tie the scheme together. Where it's we've made this example before on the show. It's like Titialii McMillan at Arizona, where he was, the most targeted guy. He had the most catches. He was the standout. He's going to be a first round pick, all those different things. And that's a high bar for Denzel to live up to. We're not comparing him to Titialii as a receiver, but in terms of the role, where, you think about Dorian Singer, Jacob Cowing, Montana Lamonius Craig, all the guys that they brought in those complementary roles were all in essence to help Titialii McMillan out. And that's exactly what this is, where they're getting their yards, they're getting their catches, they're getting their touchdowns because Titialii does so much to free them up in this system. And that's a really important thing that you can't overlook. And Lars, we saw a lot of different offensive line combinations on Wednesday, and they're certainly making this battle very intriguing. So Lars, we saw a whole bunch of really intriguing offensive line combinations throughout Wednesday's practice. And we got to keep in mind for all the everydayers out there, this was, a half shell practice. They weren't in full pads. It wasn't full contact I've been using the term half speed for all of them, where they're certainly going a little faster than that, but it's not full contact. It's nothing like that. So you can take whatever you want from it, but it's really intriguing. I know you got them all written down, so I want you to list off just one of your favorite ones that you saw.
Ooh, well, the one that intrigued me the most was kind of looking at it here. I think it's worth also mentioning who the quarterback was. It was Damon Williams, but with McCree and the rest of the traditional first team left tackle, the first team offensive line with guard and Landon and Enoch and Drew. But then we also saw Sewanee come back in and have Zach Henning right next to him. And I think with D'Angelo at center, looks like Michael Watkins at right guard and Maximus McCree at right tackle. Of those two, the former intrigues me a little bit more, just because that means that they're giving Damon some kind of potential future reps, because McCree does have 2 years of eligibility. Landon's got is your long-term center, as we discussed last segment. So to me, that's like, okay, maybe we're banking some of these for the future, where again, how much do we feed into 24? How much do we think about 25? How much, again, is Damon going to play this season? All these questions come to mind. So again, the reason why I say all this to point out, I wouldn't read too much into one thing or another. It's the key that what I would read into, what I would surmise from this, much better situation than you had in the spring. It's good to be able to find out, can McCree also be an emergency right? Let's say Drew as a party goes down, can McCree play right tackle? That's kind of that's how I would view that. Can you, in emergency pinch, get some reps here so we can say, hey, going into this week, we got to, and I'm not saying, no would I root for any injury, but just this is how you kind of have to think as coach, like, hey, let's see how he does here, just in case, because you always got to play out these scenarios. And I think, does D'Angelo end up making sense at center with Will Rogers by the look of it? Yeah, I can see that, because we see that in camp. But I could also see, Landon having that exact. And so there's all different types that kind of we saw today. And I find it funny, because I remember writing on Athlon Sports on the Huskies after the Tuesday's practice, I think, or Saturday's practice or Tuesday's practice, I can't remember when it was, where I said, hey, we saw a decent amount of offensive line combinations, not this many. And so I kind of thought it was funny, where it's like almost the coaching staff's way of saying, hey, all right, you want to see some different combinations? We'll show you some different combinations. Right. You see where we're going with this. And so I think it's a good thing, because in the spring, we're talking, you're going at half speed. You're going not even half speed. You're going to half guys half speed, and that's that was the problem. And so that's why when we talk about the offense and how much does this all factor in, it's getting all of these banked reps in. So when come times the fall, whoever your 5, 6, 7, 8 offensive linemen are that end up rotating in throughout, because I don't think some of these positions are going to be truly set as we go into Weber State, as we come out of Weber State, I should say.
No, I certainly agree with you there. I looked at this a little bit differently. I just looked at it in terms of, is this going to work a little better? Where there are certainly questions along the offensive line. And, one where I say that is, as you said, with, D'Angelo Titialii at center and Landon Hatchet at left guard, where when I look at some of those, I just kind of think, all right, when I'm trying to step inside the shoes of, Jedd Fisch or Brendan Carroll. It's, do we like this a little better? Do we like just having both these guys on the field? We like having this guy here or this guy there, where I'm not saying that's in particular the one they're saying that the most about, where, you know, as you said, we saw Maximus McCree working with what had been traditionally the first team offensive line with Landon Hatchet in there as well, where seeing some of those guys that are in there, it's just kind of, all right, as you said, let's see how many different things we can try, and let's try exhaust every possible option here. Because as we sit here recording this on August 14th, there are still 17 days before the first game. You still have 2.5 weeks to Weber State, 2.5 weeks to get it all right. So there's a lot of time to figure that out. And as you said, if they come out of Weber State still thinking, all right, we're still going to try to shuffle some things around a little bit, that's okay. You're still figuring it out, because this is, I don't want to say it's unprecedented, since colleges have certainly lost their entire offensive line before, but how many of those teams have won the Joe Moore Award the year before? Where that's where you look at this and you start saying, all right, this is a little bit unprecedented in terms of what's going on, the situation as a whole. But you start saying, okay, we brought in all these guys. Let's see what's going to make it work. And I just really think that they're going to find a way to make it all work. I personally still think that, you know, if he's fully healthy and if he's ready to go, Landon Hatchet's going to be the best option at center. But I wouldn't rule out D'Angelo Titialii at one of the guard spots. I still think that Gardner Millar's got one locked down, and I think Enoch Vimahai and D'Angelo Titialii might end up being in a pretty fierce battle at some point for that other guard spot if they feel that Landon's ready to go.
Yeah, and I think the interesting thing is we haven't really seen up until this point a ton of rotation at right guard with the first team, with respect to the first team, because it's basically been that consistent guard and Suwane on the left side and Enoch and Drew on the right. And now I think it's like, okay, going into and the reason why you add that context is to say, well, you know, they're going into the second mock game or scrimmage. But the mock first, maybe this is the first preseason game. That one was a tune-up, whatever you want to call it. I'm kind of saying this is like, you know, the college football version of preseason games where, okay, you have week 1, this is week 2. You'll probably have one more before you really start in the game week mode a week and a half from now. And in that vein, this weekend is kind of the game to play where most of the starters are going to, you want to play most of your starters. You want to see, because, you know, in that third game, we're going to see a lot of freshmen and, hey, you know, how does Shaker Kendall look? Let's get him some reps so he ends camp in a kind of positive light. And, you know, some of the young guys can get some confidence going into the season, knowing we already got the starters and secondary kind of understood for the most part. So that's why this weekend is so important. And it kind of works out well to where we're probably going to see Landon at both spots, you know, on the both sides, actually probably 3 spots potentially, left guard, center, and right guard. You know, it's more curious. I know I make the joke to you at practice where it's like, I wish we had somebody with PFF that were out there just charting the snap counts. Cause I'd really like to see that breakdown, like at the end of, because we got so many things to chart out. It's like at the end of the game, how many snaps do these guys get? I mean, theoretically we could do it, right? Where if you know, say, okay, this guy was in this drive, they had 1, 2, 3, 4, but, you know, okay, you're kind of getting a rough estimate maybe, but even then sometimes they change out units and we're not able to write those units as they go. And so I'm just really, but I think it's going to be very telling this weekend how much snaps those guys get at each position.
Yes. Well, and that's what I was going to say is that, as you said, is going to be the best litmus test for all of this, for wherever they might be right now. Because the more I look at it, the more I say, all right, this is still by far where I have the most questions on this team. Whether, you know, it be at any of the 5 positions where there are 2 of them where we know they're solid. But even then, there are going to be fans that are asking questions like, is guard fully healthy? What's Drew Azzopardi going to look like in a full season starting in a full season in the Big Ten after transfer from San Diego State? Where I believe, and I know you do as well, that these questions are going to be answered and that we're going to see them and that they're going to look solid. But at some of the other questions, at some of the positions, it's all right. What's Enoch going to look like as a full season as a starter? What's Landon going to look like coming off the knee injury? Who's going to start at left tackle? These are still really important, really big, outstanding questions. And this mock game coming up on Saturday is going to be a really nice litmus test for it all. But at the same point, it's also going to just tell a lot, depending on who plays where, depending on who plays where, how much too, about how the coaching staff feels about these guys.
Yeah, because if you think about it, a lot of these guys, whether you talk about offense or defense, is in a way there's 2 there's 2 teams within one, where it's you had the guys that were there in the spring. So Suwane was there in the spring. Guard was but wasn't. Landon was but wasn't. D'Angelo was not. Enoch was not. Drew was. So you're starting to see, okay, some of these, Zach Henning was. And so you're seeing, okay, some of these guys had, they might, with the coaching says, hey, you know what, we'll give you the young guy, we're going to give you the first crack at this. Just know there's going to be a guy now we brought in, obviously, to, nip at your heels a little bit and give you some competition. And this is kind of that threshold in camp where it's like, okay, if you haven't truly locked it down, like seeing the reason why I say that is like, okay, well, Max at right guard, right tackle is just to say, I think in emergency. That's why I wanted to kind of put that out there to say, I think Drew just locked that position down. Like that's a pretty safe assessment. So, but you still want to know, okay, how many options to the point at center depth? How many options do we have at each position? How many guys can be confident and say, okay, yes, he's good there. He's good there. He's good there. He's not good there. Okay, so don't put him there. Cool, put him over there. And I think you're reaching this point in camp where it's, okay, we know what they kind of can do. Let's actually see it. And then we'll ramp that. And so we're ramping that up into Saturday's game where we can get the full test. We'll come out of it and reassess from there and say, okay, did so-and-so, did McCree outplay Sewanee? Did Sewanee outplay McCree and potentially kind of pull in as a party and lock down that spot? Does Landon or D'Angelo separate at center? And, is anybody able to push Enoch or record? All these questions we don't have answers for, but they're on the roster. The answers are on the roster. It's just once we get to see, I think Saturday is, like you said, it's going to be the perfect litmus test because this is the only other way we're going to find out. Because in practice, as you said, they're going to be going 35 to 40% speed. They're not really trying. They're not going to be live tackling. That's also the other curious thing is how live is this mock game going to be where, okay, the scrimmage wasn't public. This mock game now is public, or at least more public than the scrimmage was. So you're going to have an atmosphere where it's an actual game. That's what Jedd's clearly shooting for. It's what he asked for. Yeah. 20,000 plus, 25,000 plus fans in a true game-like setting. 6:30 on right? 6:30, right? Is that the time?
Yeah, 6:30 on Saturday.
And so they want to make it as much of a game as possible. So how much live tackling are we going to see? Obviously, we're not going to get sacking of the quarterbacks and things like that. But okay, can we get 80%? How much? And I wonder how much will that liveness and kind of just actually feel like a legit game will change the performance of the players compared to that first scrimmage, which the offense came out slow, defense came out like maybe the offense like, hey, you know what? Okay, game time. It's game time. And now we're going to line it up. And it's like, oh, okay, maybe this defense, is good, but not as good as or maybe the offense is better, and that's why it's going to be the true litmus test.
No, I very, very well said there. I couldn't agree with you more. And with that being said, Lars, as always, thank you so much for being here. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. We really do appreciate your support. And thank you for making Locked On Huskies your first listen of the day. Now go check out the Locked On College Football podcast from NIL deals to never-ending conference realignment rumors. Our good buddy Spencer McLaughlin gets you ready for an exciting season on the gridiron. You can find the link to Locked On College Football in the description so you don't need to search. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And also make sure you go check out the Locked On Huskies Insider Program where we're dropping practice reports. We're dropping interviews. We're dropping so many different things that you're only going to find over there. We're going to be doing a Q&A that is exclusive for members of our Locked On Huskies Insider program this Friday. You get a free 2-week trial when you sign up with the link down in the description below. After that, it's just $4.99 a month. And we're doing everything in our power to make it very, very well worth it. We do appreciate all your support. And with that being said, thank you so much for tuning in. Remember to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, whether that's YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music. We're there. We're everywhere. We're updating the channel with new content every single day. So please make sure you click that subscribe button, click that little bell so you never miss when we post a new video. Make sure to like the video as well. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, drop them right down below in the comment section. And if you're audio only, please leave us a 5-star review, as it does help us out a lot. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll talk to you on Friday.